chances are good, as you go out there, you will very likely encounter more JSON than you will XML. Not that XML is bad. XML is better for rich and hierarchical documents, whereas JSON is best for just pulling data out of a system and moving it between two systems with the minimum of fuss. This is Douglas Crockford. I have a great interview from him. He's a funny guy, very, very smart. He claims he didn't invent JSON, he discovered it, because it really is based on the literal notation for JavaScript. And it actually looks a lot like the Python literal notation for objects and for lists. Now, Douglas Crockford is quite a sense of humor. He wrote this book called JavaScript, The Good Parts. That's the little one right there. And then JavaScript, The Comprehensive Guide. And the sense of humor is all the stuff that's in JavaScript that's not too useful. And while this is sort of a tongue-in-cheek, it also is trying to say that JavaScript, what Crockford is really saying here is JavaScript is a great language as long as you avoid the tricky bits and sort of keep it very, very simple. And JavaScript is indeed a great language. But JSON comes from JavaScript. You can read about JSON at json.org. JSON is not an international standard. It's not like an RFC. It really is, Douglas Crockford decided to register json.org and typed in some pages, and people started reading it and people started using it. And partly that was because it was truly derived from the JavaScript JavaScript literal syntax. So we're all ready to code. Here is some Python that's going to process some JSON. Keep it straight. Python process JSON. So again, I'm using the triple quoted string here. Now you'll notice the syntax that we are using is not angle brackets, but instead curly braces. And so the curly brace, and then within the curly brace you have key value pairs, name, colon, Chuck, and the key, colon, value. And both sides have quotes. You can also have objects within objects, curly brace, key value pairs, key value, key value. Looks a lot like Python. And then you can do this. And so this is a structure that has one key value pair that's a string, another key value pair that's an object, another key value pair that's an object, and then these are key values within those contained objects. So this is a string that again probably was retrieved across the network from some other place, and we're going to pass that string into the JSON library load s. Load s stands for load from string. So it reads this, parses it, looks at all the white space. White space again doesn't matter too much here unless it's in between double quotes. The white space doesn't matter, and so it parses it and then returns us a dictionary. So the thing that's different about JSON is that its structure and representation are simpler than XML. So in Python, everything either comes back as a dictionary or a list, or a dictionary within a dictionary, or a list within a dictionary, but it's all dictionaries. It's not a separate structure that you have to do gets and finds and find-alls and lookups. So it's right there. So when we get this back, because this is a curly brace, info is a dictionary. And so we can just use the standard syntax of Python. Info subname. Well, that will bring, let's clear this. So info subname, we'll go find Chuck. So if you compare that with the XML, that's just a lot easier. Now, when we have info sub email, that's this thing. So info sub email is that thing. And then sub hide is this. So that's what comes out here. Okay, so it's really nested dictionaries and lists. We haven't seen a list yet, but this is a set of nested dictionaries that it parses. And it's equally simple in other programming languages. This is a little more complex version where the outer element is a square bracket, which means it's going to be a list. And so we have a list of 1, 2 things. So this is a list of 2 dictionaries. So there's 2 dictionaries inside that list. So again, we take this string and we load it into, use the JSON parser to read the string and give us back, in this case, info is a list. It's got 2 items. If we print out info, it'll give us 2. And we're going to iterate through. And so if we're going to iterate through, item is going to first be this, and then it's going to iterate to this. And it's going to print out item sub name, which is going to print out Chuck, item sub ID, which is going to print out 001. Now you'll notice that there is no attributes. And that's because JSON is simpler. But we can have the X, and it just is another item, so we say item sub X, and that's going to print the 2 out. And then it'll iterate to the next one, and it'll print out the same thing for those guys. And so JSON is simpler because you can't represent as complex a data structure, or you have to compromise and map it into a simpler data structure, but then it is lists and dictionaries, and so once you've got it parsed, it is easier to understand and to make use of. So that was quick. So that's partly why everyone likes JSON better, is once you have come up with a format that you're going to send it back and forth, it's easy to make it and it's easy to read it. Now what we're going to talk about is sort of moving up a level. If you've got all these data formats and URLs that you can hit to pull those data formats down, what approach do you do as you start to construct applications that increasingly go from a single application to a networked application? We're playing with the web services chapter right now, and if you want to get the materials for this course, you can go here and download the sample zip, samplecode.zip. I've got this all sitting already on my computer. I also have the whole thing in GitHub if you want to get it out of GitHub. So the thing we're talking about now is we're talking about the JSON 1.py example from the book. And so JSON is kind of like XML except a lot simpler. And that's why a lot of people like it. It's not that JSON is always better, but JSON is better in a lot of situations that don't require the complexity of XML. So we start to import JSON. JSON is built into Python, but we have to ask to import it. Again, we're using a triple quoted string to put the JSON in there. And JSON looks a lot like Python dictionaries, key value pairs, key value pairs. In this case, this is a key, and the value itself is another dictionary, or in JSON terms, an object, but again, key value pairs within key value pairs within key value pairs. And all these little cursor guys have to, all these little curly brace guys have to line up properly. And so, like all the time, this is a string, which we normally would read and decode from the internet, but for now we're just going to have it in there. Load JSON.loads says go into the JSON library, pull out load string, and parse this, which turns this set of curly braces, spaces, commas, perhaps syntax errors into a structured object. And if we'd made a syntax error in here, then this would blow up. But if this doesn't make a syntax error, if this doesn't blow up, then we have a structured representation. Now the difference between XML and Python, JSON, is that this turns into a Python dictionary with key value pairs. Okay, and so once we have this, this is a dictionary. And we can say info subname, and that's the exact syntax that we would use to get the dictionary, and that's going to extract this value out of there. And if we want to go in deeper, we can say info sub email, and that's what info sub email is right there, and then sub hide. So that's a dictionary within a dictionary. And so if we run this, Python 3 JSON 1.py, it digs in really fast. And so this is why people tend to like JSON, is because you read the JSON, which is actually a syntax derived from JavaScript, but it looks just like the syntax for Python. So it's moving that's moving an object, a JSON object that turns in directly into a Python dictionary with nested dictionaries. Now we're going to look at JSON 2. And so JSON 2, we're going to see a list, or an array in JSON terms, but it turns into a list in Python terms. So this is a list of dictionaries. In JavaScript, that would be an array of objects, but in Python, it's a list of dictionaries. So we'll just pretend that it's a list of dictionaries. Again, we load the string, parsing, looking for syntax errors. So let's just make a syntax error here and run Python JSON2.py, and you'll see where it blows up. It blows up at line 15, which is right here. It's like this load s blows up. Now you could put a try except around it to save it, but we're not going to do that. And it even complains. It says, look, we're expecting something here in line 11, and that's line 11 of the JSON, which starts at line 4. And so I'll put my little square brace back in so it's not syntactically broken. So let's run it again and make sure that she runs, and yes, she does.